In April 1912, the Titanic embarked on its great journey from England, destined to New York. The Titanic, as its name indicates, was singular both in size and in majesty. They said then that it was the unsinkable ship. As somebody said, even God himself could not sink the Titanic. The Titanic cost, in the early 1900s, to make $750,000, which today, $7,500,000, which today would be equivalent to $400 million. That was the price of the building of the Titanic. The lowest fare for third-class passage in the Titanic was $36.25 one way for a single person who was willing to share a cabin. Second class, starting fare was $66. First class started at $125, but can go up to $4,500. $4,500 for a first class ticket in 1912 was a fabulous sum of money, because at that time you could purchase a house for less than $1,000. Not bad, huh? $1,000 you could purchase a house. If you only would have lived then, Amachaya, you would have been so wealthy today. You could have bought up the whole Forche and Fifth Avenue and Madison Avenue too. And therefore they called it the Millionaire Suite. The Titanic left Southampton, England on Wednesday, April 10th, 1912, the 23rd day of Nisan, Tofresh Ayin Beis, 5712, one day after Pesach, one day after Passover, towards New York. Among the passengers was an 18-year-old young Jewish woman. Her name was Leia Ochs, AKS, Leia Ochs. She traveled with a 10-month-old baby. His name was Ephraim Fischel. Frank Philip. His nickname, Philly. Ephraim Fischel, Ochs, with his mother, 18-year-old Leia. Leia was born in Warsaw, in Poland, in Warsaw. Her family immigrated from Poland to England. In London, she met a young Jewish man named Shmuel, or Sam. Leia and Shmuel took a liking for each other. He was a tailor who also came from Warsaw to England, and they got married to each other. One day, a cousin of Shmuel, who lived in America, came to visit his cousin Sam in London. And he tells him, "What are you schlepping around here as a tailor in England? If you would only come to America, you would be able to make a lot of money." Jews then called the United States of America the Golden Medina, because in their imagination the streets were paved with gold and the trees produced not leaves but gold. Whereas Sam Levinson once said, he said, "My father, when he came to America, he was told that the streets are paved with gold. And then when he actually arrived in America, he discovered three things. First of all, the streets were not paved with gold. Second of all, the streets were not paved at all. And third of all, he is the one who has to pave them." So this was the perspective of America. Now we're still looking for the copper. If we could find some copper, would also be good. But let's not complain. Compared to the poverty of those days, it's really extraordinary what we have in America. Leia was at this time expecting her first child. Her parents felt that in her condition, she shouldn't make the trip from England to create a new home in the United States. She's trugadik, she's pregnant. Rather, let Shmuel travel alone. He'll set up home, he'll set up shop. And then when the baby is born and she's feeling better, she'll join her husband in the United States. So Sam traveled alone. He set up home in Norfolk, Virginia. And they were waiting for Leia to give birth. Leia gave birth to a baby. They made a bris. His name was Ephraim Fischel. And now they were planning to head to America. He was 10 months old. She was strong enough, he was strong enough to be able to make this long trip from England to America. They were booked on an earlier ship, leaving to the US, also in April 1912. But as usual the case, the Jewish mother intervenes. This is a classic behavior, and so Leia's mother mixed in. And she said, I'm reading in the newspapers about the Titanic. You can't go in this other Fahakta ship. We need you to go in the Titanic. So they canceled the ticket that they had on the earlier ship, and they've got her a ticket, third class steerage. They weren't wealthy in the Titanic. She said, you need a gigantic ship, a safe ship, a sturdy ship, the best and safest ocean liner that existed till that time. And it's making its historic maiden voyage to New York. It's the first time ever the Titanic was embarking on its first journey. Leia's mother was convinced that she has to travel on the world's safest ocean liner. One day after Pesach, April 10th, 1912, Leia Ochs and her baby Ephraim Fischel, together with many other passengers, they board the ship in Southampton in England. There's fanfare, there is ceremony. They were in a third-class cabin, which was called steerage, together with many other immigrants to America. 4 days later, shortly before midnight on April 14th, as the ship was 95 miles south of the Grand Banks in Newfoundland, it struck an iceberg. The iceberg that the Titanic struck was 100 feet over the deck. That's how tall it was. Now, 90% of an iceberg is hidden beneath the water. So this iceberg was literally a mountain of ice, close to 1,000 feet from bottom to top. Most of it, of course, was under the water. Its massive knife-like edges beneath the water surface punctured and gashed the ship along 250 feet of its hull. 20 minutes later, after consulting with the ship's designer, whose name was Andrews, the captain of the ship, whose name was Edward Smith, realized that the Titanic would sink within 2 hours. Everyone on board would lose their lives unless they would get onto lifeboats and then be rescued by other passing ships in the water. Now the tragedy became clear. There were not enough spaces in the lifeboats for everyone. There were 2,200 passengers and crew on board. There was room only for 1,178 people on lifeboats. More than 1,000 people would surely die. The boat begins tilting. There's absolute panic. There's pandemonium. There's confusion. There's hollering, fear, uncertainty. The captain and the crew order that women and children would be saved first. In the third class cabin, women and children are ordered in front of the men in order to go in front of the men to be saved. Leia Ochs, the Jewish young woman from Warsaw, is holding her 10-year-old baby, Ephraim Fischel, in her arms, and she's trying to get from the third class cabin in steerage to the deck to be able to get on one of the lifeboats. The problem is that the gate in front of her cabin jammed and no one could get out. She's standing pressed against the gate, screaming for help. A sailor sees her with her little baby in her arms. He reaches over the gate. He lifts her and her child up so she could run to the deck where women and children are being put into lifeboats. Most of the people in the third class cabin did not get out. They could not get to the deck. 75% of them indeed drowned. Leia runs up to the deck with her child and she's waiting. She's waiting by the edge of the deck, trying to get online to get into one of the lifeboats to be rescued. It was frighteningly cold. Remember, this is the middle of the night. It's freezing. People are shoving, people are pushing, people are screaming, people are trying to get onto lifeboats. Down below, the water mercilessly is gushing into the Titanic, into its gaping holes. The ship is getting filled of water. The whole bottom of the ship is now flooded. Leia is on the deck, shivering from cold together with her son. One of the wealthiest women on board was a woman named Lady Madeline Astor. She sees her and her baby huddled against the cold. Lady Astor herself was 5 months pregnant. She had an 8-foot beautiful, warm shawl. She removes it. She gives it to Leia and she says, here, wrap your baby. It's so cold out here. Her teeth are shattering. Leia thanks her profusely. In fact, Lady Astor survived. Her husband perished and her baby was born 4 months later and she named him after his father. During this time, a man pushed himself into a lifeboat that was about to be lowered into the water. When the cabin stewards saw him, they forced him out of the boat, pulled him back on deck, yelling that women and children come first. This man managed to jump into another lifeboat, waiting for it to be lowered. He was determined to be saved. Again, they fought with him. They schlepped him out of the second lifeboat, and they put him back on the deck, insisting that women and children must be given priority. The man saw Leia Ochs, standing with Ephraim Fischel there on the deck. He was enraged. His eyes were wild as he stalked back and forth, consumed by anger, madness, and frustration. In a demented moment of madness, he runs towards Leia and he screams, "You think women are first? You think children are first? I'll show you." He grabs the infant from Leia's arms and he throws him overboard. Leia shrieks in horror. Her child was just thrown into the ocean. The men on board attack this man, but it's too late. The deed has been done. The child has been thrown overboard. The poor baby is gone. People are yelling and screaming, and now it's Leia's turn to get on the lifeboat. "I won't go without my baby," she cries. The officers tell her, "You have to save your own life. Your baby is lost. What are you going to gain by dying as well? You need to save your own life. There's no point in staying on a ship. It's going to sink." They literally schlep her. They try to console her. She's crying hysterically, and they just take her and place her on a lifeboat that is lowered into the water. She comes down to the middle of the Atlantic. Her lifeboat's number is 13. She is together with 63 other people. 2:20 a.m., the Titanic went down. With every passing minute, the cries for help from those dying in the water faded away. It was only at daybreak, April 15th, 1912, that the liner Carpathia arrived and rescued the survivors from the lifeboats. 1,523 souls slipped into the icy waters of the North Atlantic and drowned. 1,523 souls out of the 2,200 passengers on the Titanic. Leia was shattered. Her life was saved. Her baby literally thrown into the ocean. She took to the mattress on the Carpathia for 2 days. She would not move. She could not console herself. There was another Titanic survivor by the name of Selina Cook. Selina Cook urged Leia to come up on the deck for air. She refused. She says, "Come, you need some fresh air." She schleps Leia out to the deck of the Carpathia just to breathe a little bit. Leia is grief-stricken. And suddenly Leia sees on the Carpathia a woman holding a child. Leia hears the child crying. The voice of this child sounds too familiar. Leia comes closer, and the child sees Leia, and the child lunges. The child moves towards Leia. She recognizes the child. It was Ephraim Fischel. "That's my baby. That's my child." You see, unknown to Leia, as the madman threw the baby overboard, he fell into the hands of a woman sitting on lifeboat number 11. This woman, who already went down in a lifeboat, was a Catholic woman. Her name was Elizabeth Nye. She was pregnant. She was saved, lifeboat 11. Her husband was not permitted to follow his pregnant wife into the lifeboat. Elizabeth Nye's husband, perished. He drowned. She was a firm Catholic believer. As she's sitting on the boat, suddenly a child falls into her arms. She begins to believe that God sent her a child as a replacement for her dead husband and as a brother for the child who she's carrying in her womb. This child is going to be born as an orphan. He won't have a father. Now he'll have at least a brother. God sent from heaven a child. Elizabeth Nye is holding a Jewish baby. She's dressed in a long black dress with a huge cross. She tells Leia, it's not your child. It's God's child. It's not your child. The child was entrusted by the Lord to me. On the deck of the Carpathia, the woman who cared for Philly since the Titanic sank refused to give Leia the child. Leia goes to the captain of the Carpathia, who now becomes King Solomon, who has to determine which mother is saying the truth. You remember the story, right? Which mother is saying the truth? Thank God he did not say, take a knife. He did not say that. His name was Arthur Rustin. Arthur Rustin was the captain of the Carpathia. He is now put in the role of Shlomo HaMelech, of King Solomon, deciding who the real mother. Leia is crying hysterically. This is my baby. This is my son. Mrs. Nye is insisting that it's her child. Leia has no proof. She decided it's her child. She would not be denied this child. Captain Rustin, Arthur Rustin, takes both women and he says, come with me to my quarters. My private quarters, there we could sit and I could reflect on the matter further. In the captain's quarters, he's investigating. He speaks to this one, he speaks to this one. Leia suddenly calls out, she says, I have proof that this is my child. Captain Rustin says, what's the proof? 18-year-old Leia says firmly and with certainty, she says, I am Jewish. My son is circumcised. He had a bris. You have to understand, not like America today. In Europe at that time, only Jewish children were circumcised. The baby was undressed. Sure it is. Sure it was. Black and white. The baby had a bris. When Captain Rustin saw this, he took 10-month-old Ephraim Fischel and returned him back to his mother, Leia. The Carpathia brought all the survivors from the lifeboats to New York. Mother and baby were united with father, with Shmuel, who came, of course, to greet his wife and his baby in what has become an eventful trip. 9 months later, Leia, who was now with her husband, gave birth to another baby. Deeply grateful to Captain Rustin and his crew on the Carpathia who saved them from their lifeboats in the North Atlantic, Leia named her daughter Sarah Carpathia Ochs. God always has it his way. The nuns at the hospital in Norfolk, Virginia got confused, and instead of naming the baby Sarah Carpathia Ochs, they named the baby Sarah Titanic Ochs. And that remained her name for life. Sarah Titanic Ochs became her name. Ephraim Fischel grew up in Norfolk, Virginia, with his mom and sister and dad, with Sarah, with Leia, with Shmuel. As a proud Jew, he would walk for miles every Shabbos to daven in the Orthodox shul in Norfolk, Virginia, known as the Cumberland Street Shul. He would walk literally miles every single Shabbos to daven in that shul. He never forgot how fortunate he was to survive. He was given not one life, but 3 lives. He was given one life like everybody else, his second life when he was saved from the Titanic going under, and his third life when he was saved from this madman throwing him literally overboard. He could have perished with the other 15, 23 people, but God spared him, and his bris ensured that he was returned to his mother. Leia died in 1967. Ephraim Fischel died not so long ago. He died in July 1991.